Honor and pleasure we have today is to have Lev Manovich giving a keynote, who is also a member of our esteemed academic advisory board. And obviously the, what did I say about Richard Dawkins about memes? So you're the meme namer of cultural analytics. And obviously that makes us all the more eager to listen to you and get your input right at the start of when the group starts working. Thank you very much.
Well, guys, what can I say? It gives me so much great pleasure, and in fact, I feel very emotional seeing all of you at one table. But I also feel very emotional, very stressed out because you're not wearing masks. Because if you're not going to wear a mask, you may get sick, and then cultural analytics is not going to have the same brilliant future it may have. So I hope you all trust each other with your viruses, because when I go to seminars here in Korea, everybody wears masks. But it's up to you. It's up to you.
I can make a comment regarding this. I think it's an interesting thing for the world.
I do feel nervous. I actually feel nervous.
Thank you very much for making the comment. So one thing that is necessary to know is like all of Estonia didn't wear a mask because we're basically at the same situation as in New Zealand. But since 3 days, it's actually picking up. I'm wearing a mask because I know somebody who had a runny nose, as the other two people in the room. But yes, thank you very much. I fully agree with you.
Well, I'm not here to teach you about these things, but I think the Baltics and the Scandinavian countries have done so well, very well so far. But the flu season is coming, and you can never be extra careful. And also, I'm wonderful to see Max, who managed to arrive. I'm sure it was not easy. I mean, it's always hard to kind of make a move from one country to another country, to another university, but to be able to do it, and here you are all in the beginning of this amazing program in this most amazing and unusual year is just simply amazing. So I feel that I'm a shadow, right? I'm next to you, even though I'm a bit far away, but I do hope that sooner or later I'll be able to visit in person, and I see my job is to help Max to inspire you. And I also want to say before I start that even a few years ago, even 2015, 2016, I kind of had doubts if cultural analytics was actually going to take off, right? So some of us, have started doing it very early, including me and Max, and there has been some papers, but at a certain moment, it seemed to me that there are some interesting papers, but it's not really expanding. But within literally last 3 years, it reached a certain critical mass. I mean, that's my perspective. And now, like every time I go online, if there are more papers we can possibly read, they're coming from all kinds of disciplines, people in physics, right, applying network science. Of course, Max can tell you all about it. He's one of them. And I mean, he's not from physics, but he had an amazing paper using network science approach. People from music information retrieval, right? People from, game studies. So these papers are coming from everywhere, and it's simply amazing. So what I'll do today is actually, Max, how long I should talk? I mean, obviously we want to have time, right, for discussion, and people do know my work a little bit, so you kind of know what I'm going to say anyway. So how long I should talk for, and so we'll have nice time for a conversation.
So we have 1 hour as a time slot, but we have longer if there is longer. Our dinner appointment is at 7, which is
okay. Well, I'll be sleeping. Okay, good. Well, I will try to take maybe below 40 minutes. So I want to do 2 things. First, very briefly, like 5-7 minutes. I kind of want to take you through my book, which is coming in 6 weeks from MIT Press. So you can already pre-order it on Amazon. To explain to you a bit about what the book does, what it doesn't do, and then introduce my talk, which is not really about what the book is. It's about like what I feel for me are most difficult, most challenging questions about this whole enterprise, which in the book are really being addressed within literally the last few pages in the conclusion. So maybe it's the beginning of a next book or series of articles, and we'll see. So let me share the screen. Good. So you see the screen, right?
Yes.
So this is a book. So the idea of a book is to really make the kind of work we do, right, or want to do, accessible to as many people as possible. So it assumes that people don't know anything. What I try to do is, using my experience, right, of teaching kind of hands-on computational cultural analysis for about 14 years now, a variety of students, I try to organize a book in the same kind of order as I teach, right? So the same order as you would go, or at least I would go, about doing a typical computational culture project. First, you think about what's possible, right? When you come up with an idea, you think about what data sets exist. When you kind of get this data, you organize it, which is very important. And then you'll use kind of data visualization just to explore it. And that's where the book ends, because I will maybe explain later today or another time, because once we get to the analysis part, it gets a bit specific, right? So if you're doing text analysis, you're using some methods. If you're using image analysis, you're using computer vision. If you're doing network analysis, you're using something else. So I didn't want to write like a 1,000-page long book. So that's why the actual data analysis is outside. But I also left it outside because I think, and maybe that's a bit of a controversial idea, but when you actually get your cultural data, you describe it, you know what you're doing, the actual analysis part, the computational analysis part, it's not so different from analyzing any other data using data science methods, right? Supervised machine learning, unsupervised machine learning, PCA, cluster analysis, and so on. It's not so different. So maybe what is really unique about cultural analytics is how do you get from this thing we call culture to this thing we call data, right? This kind of process of representing and converting cultural artifacts, processes, and experiences and data is what this book is really about. So the first part is kind of like motivational introduction, right? So talking about this expansion of media and culture in the 21st century, social media, the professional websites such as Behance, DeviantArt, right? I mean, we know, all about statistics, how many billions of video minutes people watch every day. So it's obvious, but also doing a bit of a historical context, talking about, for example, how people already started to use statistics, or not even statistics, but counting, to look at text in 1860s, and how we can think about kind of diagrams, which were really popular with filmmakers, such as Sergei Eisenstein with Zigobertov, or the kind of languages of dance, Laban, or diagrams used by architects, and how we can think about this practice of diagramming, which is very popular and important in the arts as a kind of precursor to cultural analytics. And then there was a chapter asking, well, now we have so much data that the scale of, we have so much culture, and the scale of culture approaches us, the scale of physics, right? Molecules and atoms, can we conceive of a science of culture? And what would the science of culture use? Would it basically try to come up with some kind of laws of culture, the way classical science have done it, Newton and so forth? Would it use simulation, which is a new scientific paradigm, right, from 1940s? Would it use, prediction and something else? And then the next chapter is very, very important. It talks about how cultural analytics and digital humanities do not exist in a vacuum, which is what people in the age often try to pretend, but basically we use the same method which is used by industry. And the biggest cultural analytics is done today by advertising agencies, right, by companies which analyze billions of Instagram posts, Facebook posts, YouTube, WeChat, and so on. And also millions of people who use this analytics to correct their websites or to figure out their Instagram strategy. So the idea that the cultural analytics in the last 15 years has become a part of everyday digital culture for millions of people. And what we're trying to do, from my point of view, is simply kind of maybe make tools which are more open, and also maybe look at things more historically. But by and large, our enterprise, from my point of view, is continuous to what everybody else does, right? So if I have an Instagram account and I'm looking at built-in Instagram analytics and trying to figure out what the patterns and what content I should post, it's not so fundamentally different from me as a researcher looking at millions of Instagram photos and trying to figure out, their content, styles, aesthetics, and so on. So then the second part is maybe most important, as I said. again, obviously, what I'm not trying to speak for all of cultural analytics or all of cultural data analytics, all digital humanities, right? In this book, I decided to only represent, my perspectives, my point of view, so my particular take on this. So this is not meant to close the conversation, but only to open it. And again, from my own experience, right, of working in this kind of field for 50 years or so, I decided that maybe the key aspect, the key part of the book should be about how to represent culture as data, right? So first of all, chapter 4, types of cultural data, immediately I want to question this idea, which I think many people have, who come to this research just recently, that you start to digitize cultural artifacts, because how do you represent cultural process? And how do you present cultural behaviors and interaction, right? So how do you represent somebody interacting in a video game, right? You're not going to simply present it using screenshots. Maybe you record what game engine is doing. Maybe you record my eye movements, right? Maybe you record my brain states using fMRI, right? And how do you represent a process such as modern art? Do you represent it as paintings, as letters artists write to each other, as exhibitions? Many museums today put over exhibition history, right? So basically, immediately asking these big questions and questioning what it means to represent culture as data. So then there's a chapter about cultural sampling. So how the idea of sampling works in relation to the quantitative study of culture. Why is it important from my point of view? Ideally to look at everything, why we actually don't have to sample. So why is it very important as much as we can to look at everything? So why do we need big data to study cultures? But also introducing this idea of representative sample, which is known to everybody who takes statistics class, but of course not to most people in humanities or culture or curators. And then talking about, right, metadata, which is the data about data, which usually comes, right, with data, the artist names, right, of the birth and the death, for example, cities and dates of various famous people, which is what Marx used, right, in his work. And then features, right, and feature extraction, which is, I think, also a central innovation, which computational methods bring to the study of culture, with you extracting patterns in text, spatial patterns, color, texture, composition, and so on. So you kind of quantify our impressions, sensations, perceptions, and convert them into typically numerical or sometimes categorical features. And then again, there is another chapter which is very important to me about language, categories, and senses. So here I argue that one of the limitations of using natural languages to talk about culture, which is what humanities does, Estonian, Russian, Mandarin, French, and so on, these languages have developed quite late in the history of human evolution, maybe between 250,000 and 50,000 years ago, not so recently. And I think they developed to kind of complement what senses do so well, right? So the languages are very good with categorizing the world, right? We can separate between different chairs and a general category of chair and particular chairs, and we can talk about buying chair tomorrow, so we can talk about future. But what languages are very bad at is describing the nuances and small differences and analog properties of the world. So if I want to describe movements of my hand, right, I can move like this, like this, like this. I can develop a whole dense systems, right? I argue that using numbers and visualization gives us a much richer, more nuanced language to talk about it, because that's the language used by our senses, right? Because when the sensory information enters, right, our sense organs, the touch, the ear, the eye, and so on, supposedly, right, if you believe neuroscience, it's converted into the firings of neurons. So it is represented on numerical scales, and 80% of our brain is devoted to processing this numerical information. And these sensory systems have developed much earlier, right, in human evolution, billions of years ago. I think eyes already developed something like 2 billion years ago with fish. So I think the language comes very late in human evolution as a second operating system to complement, right, the sensory system. That's why language is very good to make plans, right, and to talk about future and to separate general categories in particular instances. But language, it's a wrong system, it's a wrong semiotic system to talk about art. And I think the innovation, to me, maybe the biggest innovation, which I see computational methods bringing to the study of culture, is the ability to describe analog dimensions of culture and art on the much more nuanced, much more precise numerical scales. And then the last part, as I said, devoted to visualization, both as a kind of practical method to explore cultural data, right? So here I follow famous idea of explorative data analysis, introduced by John Turkey in the 1970s. But how to explore not numbers, not categories, but how to explore media, how to explore videos, how to explore video recordings, for example, of lectures, you know. Think about this year, the biggest video data set of humanity has been developed this year is millions of people recorded their meetings, right? Imagine if you have, you know, if you have this whole video data set and you can study human behavior in meetings, right? What an amazing data set, but how do you describe it? How do you describe, for example, my movements, right? My facial expressions. This is all about 7 emotions, or is it something else? So how do you explore media, visual media? So there's a chapter about history of data visualization, then it introduces this idea of exploratory media analysis. And those of you who know my work, so here I make argument for this new type of visualization, which artists start working on in the early 21st century. And then in my lab, we developed some tools to do it, but now many people do it, where you create visualizations out of media itself. So I call this exploratory media analysis, and I also talk about use of computer vision, which is becoming very fashionable finally. And then I talk about methods of media visualization, what I call creative sampling. And finally, the conclusion, and that's what I'll be actually talking about in my talk today, which is questioning all this and asking, first of all, do we want to explain culture? Are we social scientists? Explain social phenomena using tools like linear regression, right? Why not apply these tools, for example, to cultural processes or predictive models? And when I ask maybe the key question for cultural analytics, is it really true that our goal is to study cultural patterns on different scales, or is there something fundamentally wrong with this idea? And that's what I'll talk about today. So this is the book. And I would have kind of made available a PDF for free, but I don't want MIT to find out and be angry at me because we have put lots of energy into it. So I may do it, you know, in a year or two, but for now, even if you get a book somehow, if somebody sends you a book, PDF, please don't put it online, because MIT has worked so hard and they'll think that I illegally put it online, so don't do it, okay? Please. And if you really can't, if you really don't have 1995, you know, okay, just I will help you out, but you know, yeah, don't put it all over the place. Okay, so let's actually talk about the talk. Okay, good. And I will go, you know, kind of quickly because, again, I feel I'm among equals and skip lots of things. So what does data want? That's the title. You know, you maybe know, right, the famous earlier slogan from a history of computer culture, what does information want? And the answer was information wants to be free. But what does data want? If data is a subject, what does data want? What does cultural data want? So I will try to answer this question. Okay, so that's what you saw already. So this is, you know, as I said, the key big questions which I ask in the conclusion of my book, and this is what we'll try to address partly in the next half an hour. Okay, this we can skip this. Okay, okay. Well, you know that, right? So I don't need to go into that. The point is to simply that, you know, that's, I think I'm sure you and Max are going to have an interesting discussion. What is cultural data analytics, right? Is it a particular field? It's a particular paradigm? Is it umbrella term? Because now there are dozens of academic fields which do this kind of research. I don't have an answer for this question, so I'll leave it to you. And then in the last few years, we see certain institutional movements. So there's a Journal of Cultural Analytics, which started to be published. So it's an academic journal, peer review, and it's good. But for my taste, it's a bit too much about digital humanities. It's a bit too much focus on text. Approximately 50–60% of the articles is text analysis, literature, and so on, usual DH stuff. But we're trying to make it bigger, and it's a good place to publish. And then this is just examples, right, of recent research. As I said, there are thousands of papers. So I'm not even going to go through these papers. You can simply look at the titles, but the idea of the slide is to indicate that people using computational methods look at, you know, careers of artists, to make a kind of spatial map of 1700 music genres in Spotify. There's a whole field in computer science where people doing computation analysis of fashion and trying to predict fashion. There's work, which I'll show in a second, by New York Times, using Spotify API to try to understand patterns in popular music. There are papers from people which look at hundreds of millions of photos to try to ask a very important and simple question: what do people wear? Not what fashion people wear, but what do normal people wear worldwide. And of course, I had to put here, right, a famous paper done by Max, published in Nature, which is a very, very original application of quantitative method to cultural history. So this is this work from a couple of years ago from New York Times, right, using 5 features from Spotify to represent each song. So we're looking at the evolution of these features and evolution of kind of similarity and basically evolution of variability in Billboard 100 of the songs over 20, 30 years. All right, and this is, if you make a graph, so you can see how over time, after around 2000, suddenly there's a big jump, and in each summer, the songs are becoming more and more popular. But in the last few years, more and more similar. And in the last few years, the trend gets reversed. But of course, the question always becomes, with 5 features which we're using, is it enough? Is it accurate? But I very much like this research. So to me, one of the also key advantages of cultural data analytics is the ability to look at cultural historical processes and to see them in terms of gradual changes, as opposed to categorical stages, as opposed to periods, modernism, postmodernism, Renaissance, Baroque, seeing things in terms of how features change. So here we have 5 features aggregated for 100 songs every summer, and we have this graph which shows us patterns in changing similarity. So the red dots in the beginning of this period are more to bottom to represent that each summer the songs are more different from each other. And then as we go towards 2000, for each summer the songs become similar. And this is also to indicate that often you now see this work being published not only in academic journals, but also published in the popular press, such as New York Times. And then this is a work from Barabashi, right? The place where Max was studying and did fantastically well. So this is recent work, and I can spend a whole hour talking about it because I think there are some problems in this data set. But basically, they claim to quantify the careers of 450,000 artists, and then using kind of network model, derive the importance of each gallery or museum or other exhibition places in which artists exhibit. And we found something very interesting, very paradoxical. At least when I was going to art school, right, as a teenager in Moscow in the 1970s, I'm from Moscow, some of you know, I studied art since age 13. You're basically being taught that you start very low, you show your work to your friends, you start in some underground gallery, and eventually, you get recognized and you get to modern art. But his research reveals that something completely opposite is going on, right? So out of people who had their first 5 exhibitions in so-called low prestige places, most of them stayed in these low prestige places for the rest of their career. Whereas people who started immediately at the high prestige places, again, most of them remained in high prestige places. Unfortunately, even though this paper was also published, I forgot, in Science and Nature, it's a problem because, as somebody told me, I think the data set, it doesn't really have Asian artists, it doesn't have lots of East European artists, so I don't know if this pattern is universal or not, which may be very important, but nevertheless, it's very interesting, right? So this idea that we can quantify the kind of trajectories of people's career, and you can think about how many more studies you can do like this. For example, you can go to LinkedIn and download people's CVs, you can look at careers of academics, so this can be done in a very interesting way, applying this paradigm to lots of different work. So a few theoretical definitions, right? What is culture? So we can look at culture from humanities or cultural anthropology approach. From humanities is what I think digital humanities do. So culture is really about material artifacts, text, and media objects. right? So it's about objects, artifacts, usually digitized today, and they're created by small number of authors, right? So humanities culture is really what we call professional culture, right? I mean, painters, sculptors, writers, at least after Middle Ages in Europe, we're professionals, we know their names, right? And then if you look at cultural anthropology, which starts in the 1870s, it looks at everything, right? So as you know, at the beginning, we only look at some primitive societies, so it was very small. I mean, today, if you're looking at all of Estonia, all of the world, right, it's a very big society. But for cultural anthropology, culture is behaviors, symbols, rituals, values, beliefs, everything. And the reason I have a slide is that it's interesting that if you have this new phenomenon of social media, it seems to me that you don't have to choose, right? That social media contains both artifacts and behaviors, right? So my Twitter contains both my tweets, my artifacts, and my retweets, my likes, right? Who retweeted my tweets and so on. And of course, we can say that social media has been created by companies as a kind of structured cultural data, right? So if you normally talk between people, right, or you go somewhere and listen to a lecture, this all has to be converted into structured data. But once we started communicating social media, it's already structured data platforms, right? Because everything is accompanied by the data stamp. And you guys hear me okay? Yeah?
Yeah.
Everything accompanied by data stamp and so on. But the question, of course, how informative are these behaviors, right? So if I want to look at, if I want to study patterns, for example, in some artistic images or Instagrams, how informative is the fact that every image has a certain number of likes, right? Because I don't know why people like something. Maybe we like it for different reason than this person. So on the one hand, we can say that cultural data analytics, when uses social media and other kinds of data we can capture about people, such as somebody going to a museum and looking at paintings, and we can also record this person's fMRI, for example. We can bridge this gap, but the gap, I think, still remains. Okay, this is not interesting. Okay, this is, again, those of you who knew, just to simply show you how much work, related work is done in this area in computer science. So where I usually check it is I go to Google Scholar, I put a keyword for what I'm interested in, even to only find quantitative paper, I put a data set of machine learning. So this is, I think, from last year, Instagram, we get 8,000 papers. There's a whole area in computer science, people studying tourist behavior. And of course, tourist behavior is a culture today, right? Cultural tourism, 18,000 papers, aesthetic computing, 10,000, right? So 99% of all this work is done in computer science. And often people doing very technical work because we publish something, because they need to publish something to show that their machine learning model is 1% better. But lots of these papers are also asking, right, very important cultural questions. And how does our field interacts with this much larger field of computer science in terms of funding, in terms of publishing, and so on? I think it's also a very important question for the future of our area. Okay, so we'll skip this. Okay, so now I go back to 2015. So it was almost 15 years ago. I was renting an apartment in Rotterdam. I had a fellowship in the fall. And I was sitting, it was like very similar to today, it was raining outside. And suddenly I got this light bulb, and suddenly I got this idea that we can use computer vision and data visualization and big displays and other computer tools to study visual culture at scale. Right? So it only took 15 years to set up a lab, recruit people, teach myself Excel, R, get grants, change jobs, and then write my book, right? So this book, which is coming out, is about 15 years of work. Please, don't wait too long. Makes your books much faster. So the idea, which I had in 2005, 2007, was very, very radical and very utopian. And I like it, right? Because I always say to people, you have to have a utopian idea, because if you kind of set your goal to be that much, you're going to achieve that much. If you set your goal to be up where, you're going to achieve more. So I think you always have to give yourself a utopian, realistic goal, and then you will just achieve more. So the idea was, can we basically observe and analyze all contemporary culture? Right? Why simple? Why not include everything, right? Post, images, videos, designers, portfolios on Behance or DeviantArt, all the information, all the museum listings from museum sites, all the clubs, listings, music, all the meetings from Meetup, right? Why not analyze everything which has a digital profile, which has digital traces? Okay. Well, obviously it's unrealistic, although I don't think the grant which the university got for this CUDAN project is enough, but maybe 3 or 4 of these grants together would be enough to do it. But the key thing is not whether we want to do it or not, but this idea, how would you look at all of culture being produced today, I think raises some interesting theoretical questions, which is what we really want this research to be, right? It's not really about, I think, answering particular questions or helping disciplines. It's about basically questioning our beliefs about culture and asking big questions. So I thought, what are the disciplines or what are paradigms I can use as a kind of models to how they approach this idea of studying all of culture together. So I thought we have bibliometrics or scientometrics, right? The kind of quantitative analysis of scientific publications and scientific fields using the fact that scientists can quote each other in a very structured way, but of course it doesn't really happen in culture. Another paradigm which inspires me is evolutionary biology, because if you look at some modern art museum, we have departments of painting, I don't know, sculpture, architecture, design. So basically 4, 5, 6 categories, and we think it's enough. But evolutionary biologists, I think last time I checked, it's kind of nobody knows exactly, but we think there's maybe around 100 million species in the world today. And while the idea of species is also problematic, it's one of the 19th century idea that you can categorize everything. There's something inspiring about the fact that we can classify nature around us into the millions and millions of categories. Why not have thousands of categories for culture, right? So the idea of kind of not necessarily to get rid of categories of a language, but to expand the number of categories. And finally, my inspiration also comes from geographical information system, GIS. This idea that you have a number of layers aligned to the same coordinates. And I think it's a kind of very good paradigm and also visual paradigm for representing information, including cultural information. And this is just to show you some of these maps of science produced in the last 18 years, where people look at millions of publications and they analyze who cites who, again, using network science. And then we produce these maps. And in the beginning, right, these maps kind of followed the traditional fields. So you basically see, for example, do earth scientists talk more to biotechnology or to English and so on. You can see humanities is in the corner. We don't talk to anybody. And then this is a more recent map of science. That's 2011, published in PLOS ONE. So here we're not really looking at publications. We basically have access to one of the top science site, right? I mean, science publication site. And we're actually looking at the clickstream data, like what are people from different fields who are interested on the site are looking at, right? So if I'm a physicist, am I also looking at people in biotechnology or in chemistry? And you get this kind of map. So my dream, which I knew was utopian, but I still think it's a very valuable dream because it forces us to ask many interesting theoretical questions, was I want to create this map for all of contemporary culture. And the points of this map can be artists, musicians, composers, architects, curators. They can be particular works. They can be also genres, right? And how would you do it, given the fact that in culture, except music, right, where music producers have to clear the rights for all the samples, in other areas of culture, right, of course, people quote each other all the time and people borrow from each other. Way, for example, commercial design, right, people don't have time to design everything from scratch. So you take somebody's website, you change it, or you start with templates, right? So you can use perhaps AI, right, and media computing to automatically kind of find these links. But what's a copy? What's not a copy? When the copy becomes original, it's very hard questions, right? So one of the difficulties in thinking about how to create this map of influences and map of connections in culture is we don't have a formal citation structure in contemporary culture. And also, of course, there are billions and billions of more cultural artifacts being created and looked at and interacted with every year. I mean, articles, yes, there are millions of articles in science, but it's smaller than the culture. So this is just a close-up, right? Anyway, and this is, you know, kind of interfaces, hypothetical interfaces we designed in 2008 when we just kind of got the money and set up a lab. And the idea was to have this interface on a very big display and to have something like this maps of culture, you know, for and be able to kind of get the data from millions of cultural websites and blogs. It was even before social media, and be able to analyze this data in real time. And what's interesting about this idea, it was not so utopian because a few years later, we have a new category of software called media listening, right? The media monitoring software. Things like Buffer, right? And you know, and all these tools you can use to listen to kind of your company or your own media to see how to interact with your social media and to post and to put like posting calendar. In a way, like we kind of invented something like this few years earlier, and then we put this, you know, design on this big visualization wall to imagine how it would work. We never managed to build it. It's a complex story which involves interaction with computer scientists who are very, very enthusiastic and encouraged me to apply for a grant. And when I get a big grant, we took money and just did something completely different, which I didn't know about, but these things do happen. But finally, we did build a different software in our lab where we can put up to 10,000 images of any size, this big wall, and then kind of manipulate them in real time, zoom, sort them by different dimensions, a kind of exploratory media analysis, which we did in our book. And we did this in 2010, and the software still doesn't exist, right? You can't go and buy it, and the walls still don't exist. Ultimately, you know, we've done about 40 plus projects in our lab on different scales. Some projects took years, some projects in one weekend. But in the back of my mind, you know, my original research questions never changed, right? So what are the themes, topics, styles, behaviors, and their patterns in contemporary global culture? How we distribute it spatially, what things happen where, how do we emerge, how we diffuse, how we change over time, right? So again, I think of culture as an alien biologist, or as an alien geologist, who is looking at the Earth, right, from far away, from another planet. And I don't care that much about content or politics or social issues. I do, but as a scientist, I'm interested, right, in this kind of structural transformations of culture. And of course, culture is very important for humanity, right? People had songs and wall drawings even before we had societies or law or prisons or armies. So culture, whether culture is an ornament or symbolic or symbols or memory or something else, it's essential, right, to human beings. It's maybe what really separates humans from non-humans is not tools like Marx thought, but culture. You know, so now we have so much culture, it has the scale of atoms or molecules perhaps, or species. So can we look at it kind of from outside and look at where evolution, development, diffusion on a global scale? So it becomes more possible to do it, but exactly a few years ago, when I think technically it became more possible to do it, I started to have bigger and bigger doubts whether this whole paradigm, which is kind of driving my work, is appropriate. And I think after spending about 10 years using learning data science methods and computer vision and so on, I'm still very enthusiastic about these methods, but I have bigger questions in my head after I used them for 10 years than, let's say, before. So this is what I think is for me personally, not for you, not for Max, not for others, but this is for me, right, for my own cultural analytics journey is my kind of main challenge, right? I mean, I think it's a challenge which is relevant to our people, but again, I don't want to obviously impose it to everybody. So here's the thing. So when you think about this research program, unrealistic as it is, it assumes that you can take billions of cultural artifacts, interactions, experiences, and you can extract from them smaller number of topics, themes, types of behaviors, compositions and images, some kind of topics in text, right? Architectural paradigms, you know, plans and so on. Right? You can basically extract. It's not exactly as radical as structuralism. I'm not talking about reducing all culture to binary positions, not at all. But there is a kind of reduction, right, for summarization implicit here, because obviously, you know, the only way to see patterns in anything is to reduce it, right? Because if we simply look at 10 billion images shared every day and just like every image, we're not going to see any patterns, right? So it seems logical to assume that to see patterns, we have to have some reduction. At least we have to reduce 10 billion images to maybe 1 million patterns, right? Or 10,000 patterns. But shall we? Okay. So this is what I think is basically, that's the most important thing I'm going to say today. Maybe we'll have some time to discuss it. By the way, guys, I can go forever, you know, I never run out of energy. So please, when it's 45 minutes or 40 minutes, please stop me, okay? Because I'm sharing the screen, I don't see you. So please tell me if it's already 40 minutes, we still have a few minutes.
Yeah, you have a few minutes, it's okay. We can talk.
Yeah, so just stop, yeah. Okay, so here's a question, right? So shall we, in a way, continue doing what people in both sciences and humanities have been doing for about 200, 150 years, which is aggregate, in our case, aggregate big cultural data and reduce it to a small set of patterns, which, you know, can be defined as frequently occurring ideas, themes, styles, behaviors. Right? And here we kind of follow implicitly or explicitly what I call statistical paradigm. Not even statistics, but statistical paradigm is a larger, right? Is a larger kind of paradigm of thinking, almost in Foucault sense paradigm, right? Something which begins to be emerged slowly in the 20th century, even gets formalized in the 19th century. And the standard today, of course, in all data science and data-driven research in all fields. So notice this paradigm, which we take for granted, focuses on what is common between a number of objects, right? Let's say, oh, okay, all these paintings have crucifixion and we all represent Jesus Christ in this way. So this is going to be a type 1, right? And all these paintings have composition like this, so it's going to be type A, right? So this is all these objects are chairs. So we put them in the category chair, right? All these objects are different types of coffee drinks, so we'll call them coffee drink, right? So it sounds like a common sense, but it is a particular style of thinking. We're basically focused on what is common between a number of objects and we put them in a category. And also another kind of big part of this paradigm is we don't include what occurs infrequently, right? So wherever you're looking at dimensional reduction methods like PCA, MDS, Disney, and so on, or you're looking at descriptive statistics, right? Like I think these ideas are really so deeply embedded in kind of data-driven thinking is whatever's infrequent, right? We don't pay attention to it. We call it outlier. We throw it away. We get rid of it because we want to describe general patterns, and we're happy if we can describe them well enough. And if we don't take into account infrequent things, strange things, we're happy. But maybe in art, the strange things, the infrequent things, the singular things is what's most important, right? I mean, Picasso was not like a typical artist of his time or Van Gogh, right? Everybody was painting, with kind of moralistic scenes of still life using kind of brown colors, and Picasso did these very bright colors, right? Kind of like RGB, like kind of Instagram, right? So he was a complete outlier, but that's who we remember, right? So you already see how when we start applying these ideas to culture and arts, they don't always work so well. So what would be the alternative? Well, the alternative would be to refuse this dominant paradigm and instead focus on diversity, variability and differences, including tiny differences. Right? So if for the last 200 or 300 years, humans have really focused on similarities between things, and this has, I think, allowed them to develop intellectually very well. Where it is in humanities where we categorize things into paintings and sculpture and new genres, or in politics where we classify societies into capitalist or communist or something else, right? Or in the sciences, where we have molecules and atoms and species and galaxies and so on, right? It worked very well. But now at the beginning of this whole new era where people are going to be applying data-driven thinking to culture and arts, is it such a good idea? So what I'm suggesting is something which I think is actually completely mad and completely impossible. That's exactly why I think, at least I'm trying to think about how to make it happen, which is can we work on big cultural data without any aggregation? So first of all, include everything. Don't throw anything away, no outliers. The second thing, which I think is practically most important and quite realistic, is include what I call small cultural islands that usually disappear if we use one big sample in many standard data science methods. So in a second, I'll show you example. It's a paper where we look at 100 million photographs from Instagram to try to figure out what people wear. But we completely missed all people who only wear black, right? Only people who are actually fashionable people, because we just threw them away because the sample was actually not big enough. And the second thing is we have to question similarity, right? We have to, maybe it is Aristotelian categories or fuzzy categories, or kind of even Wittgenstein family similarity or dimension reduction. And basically you say, Lev, you're out of your mind. We're here to get work done. We just got this big European grant. You know, we all got hired, want to publish papers. Are you telling us not to do it? Of course, guys, do it. Of course, do it. But sometimes don't forget to ask these impossible questions, you know, because it can make your papers better. And just very briefly, like I think I made my point, I'll just show you a few examples of how things are working today and why I think it's problematic, right? So in the last 4 years, many people started to produce this similarity-based maps of images where two-dimensional distance, right, corresponds to image similarity. And this is a work, there's already better examples, but this is a work from 3 years ago on Digital Humanities Lab at Yale. So we took a collection of 27,000 historical photographs, you know, and they applied standard convolutional neural network, which was pre-trained, and then they extracted features from a layer before the last one. Even they use UMAP, Tisny, right, one of this dimension reduction method, and we made this map. The images grew by similarity, and then we extracted, and then we can give you interface which has some categories, and then once you click the category, it will kind of zoom in into part of this map where you see images in this category like boxes, buildings, and buttons. And right, so here, for example, I clicked right on a category which took me to the part of this huge map, which kind of shows women wearing dress, but we're all different, right? And why all these things are put into one category? Shouldn't I have more control over how similarity is calculated, right? So what looked very exciting for myself, right? I was very happy when I was able to do it like 10 years ago, and for others, I think today we have to question. I think actually it's a bit about that end. I think we have to do something different. I just want to say, so I think what's interesting, that's why I pay lots of attention to industry. Industry, while sometimes theoretically understanding it itself, is actually often offers us much more progressive and much more revolutionary model. So think about how in industry, science is often used not to categorize things and not to aggregate things. For example, you have ad platforms, which are making predictive models for each user for different times of the day. So Google may have a model for you to predict what you're going to click on, not just the whole model for you as a person, but different models for you different hours of the day. Think about how Netflix, Amazon, and so on are going to give you custom recommendations based on your kind of history, right? So in a way, industry is much more advanced in terms of individualization than sometimes humanities, right? Search engines index every web page we find, right? Google doesn't say we're only going to index with 1 million pages because we Google think we're important. No, we try to index everyone, right? Spotify analyze every music track. And that's kind of this idea, right, which I promote in my book, which we should analyze everything, because why not? Our computers are big enough to do it. And then this is just a few examples. Max, I'll finish in 2 minutes. So these are examples from these papers, which I showed in the beginning as examples, right, of cutting-edge research. But now I'm looking at these papers more closely, and I'm seeing how this logic of aggregation, summarization, and getting rid of our outliers is all over this paper. So there's this paper about where we look at 1 billion Facebook photographs in 2000, actually I think it was 2018 paper. And you can see, like, if you read the paper, you see how the scientists are making this move after move. You can throw things out, right? We select the most common concepts. Why? We ask annotators to describe main concepts. Why not everything? After pruning frequent keywords. So by the time you get rid of all this inclusion stuff, you end up with this kind of bourgeois taste. You basically end up with this mass culture where people like me, people like Max, you know, we are not going to be in it, right? Because we're too infrequent, we're too strange. And then this is a paper, for example, again, from a few years ago, where we try to basically quantify how much more likes and shares Instagram photos which have faces get, and we said, well, actually, if you have if you show a face in your photo, it increases the chance of getting likes by 38% and comments by 32%. But that's a very dangerous result. It means that, in fact, 62% of his photos are not going to get more likes. So what am I actually learning here? Yes, if I'm like advertiser, or I'm using Instagram and I'm going to put and I just want to get as many likes as I can or as many clicks on my products, right? I'm going to put all these faces, but for other people it's more subtle. So 38% simply means that, in fact, our photos which may have faces, we may get less likes, right? So we're actually not learning very much here, and then this is again from his paper, right? So you can see how word common, frequent just appears. So I think the computer sciences perhaps can be excused for doing it, because we're simply taking the established paradigms, tools, and ways to do things in computer data science. But if we're serious about sort of culture, I will stop here, right? So we have time for research. If we're serious about culture, I think that we should really question these ideas and these methods and think about whether we should perhaps use them differently, use them against the grain, and perhaps focus not on similarity, but on the differences. And why this is important? Is it because Lev thinks so? No, it's important because I think it's actually true. What do I mean by this? So, here I'm in Korea, right? Here I'm in Korea. There are millions of cafes everywhere. Every 50 meters there's a cafe. Every cafe is different. Yes, we all minimal, we all very spacious, we all have these beautiful gray, white colors, but everyone is different. I go to a store, right, which has beautiful clothes for young men, young women. Everything is white, but there's 50 types of material, 50 types of finishing. So you know what I mean? Because contemporary consumer culture, it has so many things. The only way for for companies and creators to separate each other, to separate themselves, is by subtle small differences. So if you're not paying attention to these tiny small differences, you're actually not really analyzing contemporary culture as it is, right? So if you're doing this analysis, looking at 100 million photographs, and you say, oh, in Tallinn, people are wearing white t-shirt and black jeans. Oh, in Riga, they're also wearing white t-shirt, black jeans. You're actually not learning anything, right? So I think the reason we should actually maybe not sample the whole world, but say, I'm going to go to one street in Tallinn and just take photograph of everybody and figure out what we're wearing, right? You would actually get probably better results, right? So again, the reason I think that this idea of categorization, only putting things in the categories because we think we're similar and not paying attention to the subtle differences, outliers, and to tiny, tiny variations, it's problematic because actually, unless you do it, you can't really do justice to contemporary culture, because contemporary culture is not about 10 genres. It's not about 10 departments in a MoMA. It's about hundreds and thousands of small differences. So that's what basically people paying attention to. They also have to pay attention to the same things as cultural data analytics researchers. Thank you so much. I hope it was controversial enough, and I hope we can have a bit of discussion.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much. So let me switch on the chat so we can see who's asking what. So if anybody has a question, please put it in the chat. In the meantime, I'm commenting a little bit. So thank you very much. I think lots of the stuff you said and lots of the questions you actually raise are very central to us. And having this kind of outsider existence working with multidisciplinary scientists, I think there's a lot of things that are super for granted in systems biology and in network science and broader fields, which I think we can now bring in because they actually go exactly to the point of what you raised. Like if you say, should we really aggregate all the data and look at the common patterns? Actually, if there's this concept of frequency distributions, right? And if you look at the frequency of patterns in nature, and culture very much is part of nature in that sense, we probably get a kind of pink noise distribution. There is some common large patterns, and there's many, many small, and there's a gazillion of super tiny patterns, and the interesting ones may be the smallest ones. And so there is also an example from astronomy where, you know, Fritz Zwicky, he got famous by cataloging all the stars in the sky with his wife, and then they found neutron stars, and these neutron stars are super, super rare. This is what the astronomers look at. Like, you've got billions of stars, but the neutron stars actually allow you to explain something. And so that is something we can also find in culture. And I think, you know, I use some different concepts, but I think we have a common goal here, and I think we should do this. And I mean, not, you know, basically your groups, my groups, but cultural analytics in general, we should approach it like systems biology and should say, okay, what are the different types of things? Why is it that Italy is much better in terms of coffee? Because there's 3 million different cappuccinos, not only the Starbucks cappuccino. So that is a quality we should explore. And diversity, as you know, there's this construction called confusion matrices in machine learning. And one of the key problems is people always want to optimize the classification. But that is actually not the goal, because the stuff that happens off the diagonal is much more interesting, right? And I think that is the kind of thing which, as long as we live in a culture where everything is conventionalized, and that's also true for scientific products. You cannot make a landing in the humanities if you don't write a humanities book or humanities article. You cannot make a landing if you have too much qualitative analysis in a physics analysis, but it should be all together in essence. That's the kind of notion we carry on here. And by the way, the birth-death video is exactly coming out of that spirit, the Charting Culture video of our science paper, where we plot all the dots we have. Of course they're biased.
Exactly.
And the point is, you see the bias. Everybody sees the bias. We can quantify the bias, and nevertheless we can have the aggregate patterns. And then we can deal with the bias and the aggregate patterns. One and the other can only be understood with both of them, in essence, right?
Well, I think you know obviously much more intricately in network science than me. Like, I think I just had one seminar at UCLA, a summer seminar. But for example, like, when you measure with various network characteristic centrality, right? You are taking into account all the nodes of a network, right? But at the same time, in the different parts of the network, we have a bit of a different characteristics. So you also have some aggregation going on, right? But you know, as you said, what's interesting when you think about 19th century, right? So the first graph types that become popular is like polar chart, bar chart, right? And it's really about aggregation. It's very interesting historically why scatter plot and later the network plot, right? They develop much later because we don't, right? Because the scatter plot actually doesn't aggregate by itself. I mean, there's lots of issues. And also, I want to say that, of course, I'm not saying. But you know, sometimes it's really useful to aggregate. For example, you know, if you want to, people publishing papers where we're looking at the 19th century newspapers and we're trying to figure out what proportion of pages have images, and it sounds logical, except the moment you start looking at what's the image in 19th century, it breaks down, because you don't have this image like a 20th century square. You have like image which blends in with type, so the whole idea of image goes out to a window, right? So, so it's very tricky. Where sometimes strategically, politically, you want to aggregate and you want to say there are categories, but then in the back of your mind you say, actually, I know it's not so simple, you know. And I think the point is, you know, just to kind of keep this complexity in mind, you know, and just to remember, even if you publish and say, well, it's all like this, you know, you have to remember that there's something else going on. But I think there are different projects where this idea of outliers and the small differences are more important. There are projects where it can be less important. And as I said in my talk, I'm not about throwing away all the categories. It's also about multiplying categories, right? So if you have a field which has 10 categories, it's better to have 50, and it's better to have 100. So sometimes multiplying classical Aristotelian categories can be also very useful because not everybody can think about everything in terms of like density and UMAPs, right? It also can be like a bit difficult.
I have lots of questions, but there is many questions. I hope from the audience and from the participants. So, anybody wants to ask something? Yes.
Yeah, maybe I'll just take my mask off for a while. Thank you so much. So many interesting thoughts arises from this presentation. I really like the idea of kind of like looking at the outliers and what is kind of like specific about kind of like different cultural features. But I was just kind of like, I just started to thinking, started to think now that you were talking that actually, don't you think that it's interesting to look at, or the kind of like relationship between what is common and what are the outliers, and kind of like, and how these change over time. Because I think that there might be some interesting dynamics that would tell not only about what is kind of like common and what are the kind of like very extreme differences, but kind of like what is the dynamic there.
Well, absolutely, yeah. I think it's an extremely interesting question. Again, I'm not sure which branch of science people are looking at, but just think about, visualize, right? So let's say we have this like a scattering, like this cloud of points, right? We're all here, even we have one point which appears here as its outlier. Maybe there are a few more points, and maybe other points go to it. So after a few cycles, it becomes another common thing, right? So, but you can imagine immediately 5 or 10 different patterns. And I don't know if anybody, in terms of looking at the history of culture, have a look at these patterns, right? If the kind of patterns, I mean, right, there's a huge area of research in social sciences about innovation in this and that, but I don't know if we're actually looking in culture, right? Today or historically, people looking at this kind of, as you said, at this structural, historical, different types of development, and this can be actually extremely interesting, I think. And I'm not sure which branch of science would give us some models, so we just have to like visualize it and see how it looks. But that's, I think, thank you, very, very interesting, if I understood you correctly. Ah, Pia. Hi, long time no see.
Yes, greetings from from Tallinn, but I'm socially distancing myself whenever possible.
But you get a prize for most beautiful background. Look at this. You have to give us a tour of your place.
Thank you.
Question or just
jump in? Yeah. So welcome and thank you for your very inspiring talk. I'm Marek Tamm, one of the CUDAN faculty members. I mean, it's probably more like a comment, but if I try to summarize your 2 main points, at least in my opinion, and if I translate these into my terms, I'd say the first important thing is that in every culture data analytics, the key question is how do we define culture? And just as you started, you kind of made this distinction between the humanities approach oriented in artifacts and the anthropological approach focused on the rituals and practices. And I would put it that actually it's about the 2 dimensions of culture: the text, culture as text, and culture as practice. And text meaning, every kind of, science system, be it artifact or image or film, whatever. So actually the question is, which is I think important for cultural data analytics, how to combine these 2 dimensions, how to have this kind of holistic approach to culture, which includes the textual and practical or practice orientation of the culture. And my answer would be that actually semiotics is this kind of discipline was able to comprise these 2 aspects, culture as text and culture as practice. At least this is something what Lotman was very much aiming at, to include the statistic and dynamic, aspects of culture. So this is probably something we could, try to develop here, how to combine these 2 dimensions. And then the second main distinction you made between the statistical paradigm and individualized paradigm. And probably this can be also just, reformulated as this old distinction between explaining and interpreting, between, let's say, qualitative.
Yes. Social science versus humanities.
Exactly. And that's probably the second challenge: how to combine these 2 perspectives. Because I believe that we cannot, go back to opposing these 2. That we have to find a kind of synthesis. And I think you already pointed out a few examples, and also Max brought out this idea that actually even in the quantitative study you can still, remain, sensible to exceptions and to details and to the small issues. So actually in my mind, at least in this project, these are the 2 main questions: how to combine the textual and the practice aspect of culture, and how to combine the quantitative and qualitative take cultural analysis. So, yeah,
very briefly, very briefly. And, I mean, it's okay. I mean, okay, so we should just have like, you know, should just have a non-stop seminar until the funding runs out for the next 5 years. Just keep going. Or at least every Friday. Well, actually, if you do invite me sometimes to like, be a reading group or seminar, I would be very happy because, you know, I'm kind of happy, but I'm completely alone here, like, you know, sitting with my wife. I mean, I'm online, but I don't have this community, so actually I'm very happy. No, but, you know, I want to say one thing. So I completely agree, but, you know, this idea with how do we combine textual practice, I mean, it's a big challenge, and definitely we shouldn't try to do it in every single project because otherwise we'll never do anything. I mean, the second thing is about explaining and interpreting. You're right. But I think I also just simply want to say that I think that humanities kind of, we do two things. On the one hand, we do look at particular cultural, let's say, experiences, artifacts, situations, and try to interpret them. But we also deal with categories like 19th century novel, you know, or like epic versus poetic, right? I don't know, still life versus landscape. So I think the humanities, which in fact was kind of dominating human knowledge until the sciences, was also dealing with categories and trying to kind of interpret whole categories of things, right? As well as, and the last thing I would say, so I think it's also maybe one way to say it's categorical versus like individualistic, but, and I mean, I have very particular ideas how I actually want to go and try these things out, right? It's not as abstract as a thing, I just need a bit of time. But I have one practical idea how I actually want to visualize what happens when you start putting things in categories, in more categories, and more categories, and I will try to do it and share. But the thing about semiotics, you know, you got me because, you know, of course, what I'm hidden underground semiotician, right? Of course, when I was 17, I read Lotman and changed my life. But what happened is the reason I don't announce it every moment is when I came to America in the 80s, for whatever reason, semiotics kind of was out of favor. And I think it became even more out of favor in the 90s when I was going to graduate school because that was already practical correctness, right? I was already called formalist, even as a PhD student, even right? And somehow, so of course, but I never have semiotics. So I basically realized when I was 30, it's really too hard to do semiotics of one image. It's just too hard. So I'm going to be instead talking about new dimensions of new media. Instead of doing semiotics of traditional culture, which I found simply too hard, I said I'm going to do something easy. I will basically start describing dimensions and categories, interface, database of new media. And when I came back to semiotics 15 years ago, I said, I still think it's very, very hard to interpret the meaning, the structure of one image, but maybe I can look at patterns across millions of images. So I do think of cultural analytics as a kind of another attempt to do semiotics, to try to do it right from a kind of different point of view, to at least try to look at distributions of these different patterns, different characteristics. And precisely because I'm a kind of hidden underground kind of semiotician, now I came out to just to you guys, right? So of course I have now many more friends in Italy. We keep inviting me to all the semiotic congresses. So I think we kind of, so maybe like maybe after 5 years I only talk about semiotics. So maybe this is like the kind of turning point. So yeah, obviously semiotics is here, but I also think semiotics promised so much. Semiotics in the 60s, it was another age moment. There was another moment when people turned to science. And right now we're going to have a scientific theory of how culture worked, and it didn't quite deliver. So I think we have to learn from what happened to semiotic structuralism, where it was very ambitious, and it got to a certain point, and then I think something didn't work, and we have to learn from them, because if we simply can go back to semiotics, I think we'll be dealing with the same issues and problems which semiotics have been dealing with now for 60 years. That's my, you know, so it's not simply return, it's a kind of like spiral, you know?
So is anybody having problems with putting something in the chat because there's nothing in there? So maybe we didn't give permission. I just wanted to ask. So okay, yes, good. I encourage people to ask more.
Okay, I may ask if you.
Yes.
or just because I'm just thinking that okay, one direction to go is to analyze everything, like which is of course extremely challenging. But I'm just bringing forth the problem or challenge I had when I worked with artistic installation obsession 2005. Where I wanted to create this kind of multidimensional space of art, the content of that particular narrative. And even when we looked at such a small amount of media clips related to particular narrative, cinematic story, plus sound environment. So I realized I had to use like two different approaches to that. I realized how immensely, infinitely, unendlessly, I could just annotate one set of media clips, and in that point, I started from two different directions. The other one was that I named categories for the media clips, and then, but then the other way to approach was that I created this two-dimensional space where I had all the media clips spread around, and then I separated them into groups depending on how I felt that they were different. So now we're talking about something that is about artistic art, and about how you perceive the images without words. Just that these are somehow different from these, so I put them in different categories. But the point is that exactly this, that how do you get a hold of these embodied kind of feels of differences that you cannot put into the words? So this is a challenge.
Absolutely. Well, I think maybe also I just want to say, I mean, because maybe I didn't quite completely make it clear at the end what it is I actually think about this idea for analyzing everything. On the one hand, it seems to me what I was saying is that it's a very bad idea. In fact, we should take 100 things which are almost completely the same and like really go in depth. And so, for example, what will happen if you take, 5,000 images, which are really different by like 2 pixels, and fed them into a neural network? Cannot deal with them, right? Because neural networks are now used to classify things into like 11,000 categories. At the same time, I don't want to give up on this idea to see more. Because, for example, right, I mean, for 10 years now, Instagram has been a very dynamic, right, very interesting area of visual culture with 1 billion people there. I mean, it's basically now more dominant for many people than Facebook. And yet has been a single paper which would say, whatever 50 or 100 different types of images on Instagram? No. The only paper I know from 2014 reduced it all to 10 types. So even be able to describe like, okay, 50 or 60 or 30 types of images on Instagram or types of compositions, contemporary photography, actually wouldn't be so bad, right? So obviously I'm not going to go and look at 1 trillion tomorrow, but just to have this very basic iconographic project in relation to contemporary culture wouldn't be so bad, because I don't know about you, I'm just simply curious, right? What is out there? And also what are the proportions, right, of these images. So in a way, like while I kind of promote this idea of subtlety and tiny differences, I'm also promoting very kind of banal, very basic categorization, because when you think about contemporary culture, whether it is artistic video, installation, or processing, right, generative art, or dance, or motion graphics, or web design, we don't know, right? We don't know, right? We're historians, I kind of don't look at them, so we actually don't know what's out there. So I would like, so even having this very old-fashioned set of 20, 50, 30 categories, but not 5, it wouldn't be so bad either,
So,
yeah, anyway, yeah.
One could add, like in funding applications, right? This is a typical death sentence to say, oh, you cannot look at everything, you just get random stuff out, and it's the possibilities are too infinite. But one of the take-homes, I think, of the last 15 years of cultural data analytics, on different monikers, but of the people who've done this, is that yes, the permutation space of culture is maybe even more large than the one of biology, right? So there's not 4 characters, there's not 26 characters, there's an infinite amount of possibility. You don't just have 60-degree angles as in a protein. There's many, many different ways how to order it. But if you look at the data is bounded. There is not, you know, give 100 curators 100 hours of time to classify 100 objects, there will be a shape to the classification that is not randomly distributed in that space. And I think that is the reason.
If you think about matrix of possibilities, some things will be more frequent, some things will be less frequent.
Exactly. Right? And that's where we learn more about ourselves, right? That's the key point.
Yeah, but I also want to say, I mean, this is I didn't want to show like all the slides because it's not. But here's another. And guys, you know, like I'm sharing with you with kind of ideas which keep me up at night. So these are most difficult questions. Of course, even if it's the basic stuff, it's already fantastic. But here's a difficult question, right? So is it appropriate to think about culture in terms of its elements or strategies or techniques or idioms and their combinations, right? So the semiotician with me would say yes, but now I begin to wonder, because think about Gestalt theory, right? You know, which has now become common sense in aesthetic and art and design, right? So the idea of Gestalt is that, you know, you don't simply have elements and you put them together, and then you can kind of predict, you can calculate, right, the result of the sum of elements, but you have another phenomenon which emerges on a different level. The same thing goes, I think, to emergent and chaos theory. So what I wonder is that for some types of culture, for some cultural corpuses, we can say, okay, there's a particular type of poses, there's a particular type of dresses which people wear in the 1st century Florence, there's a particular types of, I don't know, their gazes, and we can look at it as this kind of combinations. But I think for our, maybe more contemporary, maybe modern culture, which is about creating this unique kind of feelings, right, unique states, we can do it, right? In other words, you know, if you simply say, can we calculate the meaning of the effect, right, the importance of this artifact as a combination of its element, maybe we can't, because where these elements get combined is you get another, right, another thing, right, another kind of third meaning or fourth meaning or fifth meaning, the quote part, which you can't simply reduce to combination of elements. And this idea, right, brings another. So in a way, I think all the things I'm talking about, but not unique to cultural analytics, it's the same issues which semiotics had to deal with at the end of the 60s, and I think initial excitement gave way to this very difficult question, where art was resisting, right, this kind of easy reduction to elements and their combinations, perhaps.
Yes.
Yeah, hello.
Yes. Comment Roller.
Yeah. Hello from Barcelona. Lev, you and me 10 years ago we did something in Linz. Anyway.
I know.
Okay. No, I was thinking.
Actually, Electronic is starting like today, but you know we never publish any schedules. I don't know what's going on there. If anybody can find their schedule, let us know. Anyway. My question goes in the process of classification of a collection or a corpus of media. In my case, I work more with text. When you get the categorization, then what do you think about the labeling? Because at the end, the labeling is the ultimate interface that the user have with the result of the analysis. I mean, independent of which kind of analysis you use for the categorization. What do you think about the labeling? I'm a bit in the hybrid for a hybrid process where the analysis is very machinal and the labeling is more human. But what do you think about that? But are you talking about labeling? Okay, but are you talking about, for example, if you do cluster analysis, so when you have these clusters and how to label them, like these kind of things, or what do you mean by labeling? Exactly.
Microphone. I can switch it on, right?
We lost. Okay. You are mute.
I asked him John with. Okay.
Sorry, I took it off.
Yes.
Okay.
Again. Yes.
So no, I just wanted to get the idea of what you mean by labels. So for example, let's say I do kind of like PCA visualization, right? And I do clusters, and I see these clusters, right? And then I can say, oh, this cluster, I think I can give it a label. I think this cluster represents, I don't know, people who are looking at each other, or right. And basically, machine learning gives you this representation of data, but open topic modeling with no labels. When you have to give them labels, is that what you're talking about, or something else?
No, it's okay. It's not.
Well, I think that there are actually two issues, right? One is labels. The second issue is that, so if you do this kind of feature extraction, right, and then you do dimension reduction, and you end up with this the PCA, UMAP, TSNE thing, for example, you have to see what you get, right? So it's possible that in some cases, in some cultural corpuses, the clusters are so well defined that in fact you can say it's actually okay to talk about categories. In other words, there are many examples of cultures which are rule driven, right, or implicitly or explicitly, and you can say in this case we can talk about categories because categories objectively exist in culture, and they exist both for producers and for readers, right, for audience. In other cases, you have to look at this map being produced by data analysis and to say, actually, we don't have any clusters. Everything is equally distant from itself, or maybe you have clusters which are very fuzzy. So the idea which I kind of promote in my book is that you can, in a way, you can't decide it abstractly. You have to look at particular cultural corpus or cultural period or group of artifacts and say, well, actually, let's look at this. Let's do data analysis and see how much variability. Maybe in this case, it's okay to talk about categories because there are actually categories in this culture for people who were living in it. In other cases, there are no categories, right? Like for example, 99% of modern art, it's this territory between abstract and realistic, and we don't have any labels for it because it was all thrown. All art historians just put it away, right, as something out there. But that's what 99% of art is. So until we analyze millions of images, we actually don't know what's where. And maybe we'll say there's actually continuous dimension from abstract to completely photorealistic, or maybe not. Maybe there are some clusters where, but until we look at this, we actually don't know.
Okay. So it's 5 minutes to 4, and so we're 25 minutes over. This is a fantastic discussion, but I want to pick up Lev's desire from before. This would be great if we could have a running seminar until the funding ends. Actually, that's somehow our plan. And so basically, we would love to do a seminar series, which basically will happen approximately weekly during the semester, at least, where we bring in speakers like Lev.
Well, I think also people. I'm now part of this kind of weekly lab meeting right here in Korea, but it's open. Yeah. So once in a while, it's only people from a lab presenting. Other times we invite people, and I think if you guys if I can be part of it, if it works for my time, I promise to be very silent. Like I will not talk too much where I sometimes do, but I'm just very happy to be part of a community.
Yes, exactly. And so this is sort of the idea of CUDAN is to have a lab that works together, very close knit, and everybody has like their external collaborators. Plus, we are cross-fertilizing across the schools, BFM, Baltic Film and Media School, Humanities, and Digital Technology, but also with external stakeholders, and of course with the crowd at large. And sort of because we are in this privileged position that we actually can do things, invite people for cultural analytics, we'd like to build a global crowd, sort of. And so if you have an interesting idea you want to present, let us know. And in the same way, obviously, you can participate. Not all events will be public, but we try to as hard as possible. And so ideally, obviously, we will be a cluster locally in the future and a cluster globally. And I think that is what will drive cultural analytics forward. As you know, systems biology is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise in every university, basically. So in that sense, we're like a tiny flock of birds, but that doesn't mean we can become a very large flock of starlings. So
I think it's a historical moment where I think actually it's ready, because I think there's so many people interested in this and doing it from different fields. And if you like, we'll talk later. I can maybe recruit, because I'm now collaborating with some people on some papers, very interesting people, somebody from philosophical statistics, but everybody would really fit well into this conversation. So maybe I can also, I have people, as from data, maybe if you like, I can also recruit some people, because not everybody would want to speak in a seminar for free if we're very high level, but maybe I can also bring some people in, if you like, propose them as potential speakers, so we can have we can basically make this bigger and bigger and stronger.
We're open to suggestions. So with that, I would say until next time. And so if you're interested in following us, please drop us an email. There will be a mailing list. There was a mailing list, but the key thing is that's one thing we need to recover. Okay.
Yeah, mailing list or something where we can also share, opportunities for conferences, good places to publish, just because this work can fit into so many different areas, right?
Yes.
I think you guys figure out. And also I want to say, I think Max, you guys have to recognize he's kind of hero. He made this journey like a bird, right, from one across Atlantic, and having been in the Baltics, it's a different culture. People sometimes are very silent, very noble, very silent. So please make whatever you please. You have to promise me you do whatever you can to make him feel at home, to speak a lot, to make him proud, so he doesn't run away somewhere, doesn't fly. So please, make it as successful as possible. Help him, and he will help you, because it's always hard to start something, but you got best possible person in this galaxy to lead this enterprise. And and then people behind the scenes will be just like shoving snow just to help a little bit as much as we can from a distance.
Okay, it's too much of the praise.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank everybody involved here, because Tallinn University, Tallinn, Estonia, the people I work with here are all very, very awesome, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Nice. Estonia did Skype. Now it's time to do academic Skype. Okay, let's
nice.
explore the analytics bomb. Okay, thank you so much. Talk to you later.